Welcome. We are live. I've got this new black tip P blocker. I used to have this detached P blocker, and after 3 years of beautiful service to POAAS and the whole Lord Enoch channel, it went kaput. This was cheap. It was like $8 or something on Amazon. Great replacement. Just a little side plug. I didn't even name the brand, so find whatever you like. I've seen others use it, and I'm always adapting to the ever evolving situation. So that's that. I'm here to review a narrative of captivity in Abyssinia with some account of the late Emperor Theodore, his country and people by Henry Blank, MD, medical doctor. He's got a bunch of other initials here. I don't know what they all stand for. MRCSE is one, another is FASL, and then he's got etc. after that with ETC. Staff Assistant Surgeon, Her Majesty's Bombay Army. And then in parentheses, lately on special duty in Abyssinia. London, Smith Elder and Co., 1868. So he is a medical doctor, and in my humble opinion, and I think any real savvy onlooker's opinion, a spy of Queen Victoria in the middle of the 19th century, sent to Ethiopia or Abyssinia. Abyssinia, of course, just um, Habasha. The word Habasha turned into the land of the Habasha or the Habasha. Habasha Agar is how or the Habasha country or city state is how my grandfather translated this text when he translated this text in Amharic. The fact that he selected it for translation made it important to me and made me want to read it. So I read this book. Overall, I think it's a great book to read. If you read it, um, it's going to strike you that as a spy for Her Majesty Queen Victoria of England, he is going to be, and as a person who was imprisoned or made captive of Emperor Oras Theodros, King of Kings of Ethiopia, he's going to have his own biases and his own issues. He begins the book, and by the way, you can find the book online for free on DuckDuckGo or in Google Books or wherever you want. You can also go to aksum.gumroad.com and throw me some change for it and make it easy for you. What you can't find on Google that you can find on aksum.gumroad.com. Separately, I put the Amharic introduction to my grandfather's translation. I haven't translated that preface yet. It's about 5 pages of Amharic. And in it, my grandpa argues that with all the biases and all of the hatred towards Emperor Theodros that is within it, you can see that the reason for the chikane or the reason for the harshness of the emperor was that after the era of princes or Zamana Masafant, Ethiopia, which had been a thing for some 2000 plus odd years, and especially at that point, good 1500 years of solid statehood, was being highly decentralized and was kind of like Somalia today, the subject of fiefdoms and duchies and warlords, as some would say. So the idea that Theodros had, and there's some people today even arguing about his ethnic background, which is funny. He grew up in Kwara and he was a proud Ethiopian. That's all you really need to know. But you could look further into it if you'd like and present me with any evidence you have if you find it to be relevant. Is that he had an idea of something greater than himself. And the idea of something greater himself was this idea of Abyssinia, Habashaga, this idea of Ethiopia. And I think this bothered a lot of Ethiopians to see a kind of very proud nation. Henry Blank at various points refers to kind of civilized peoples, barbaric peoples, and then he kind of views the Habasha as somewhere in between, as semi-civilized, semi-barbaric. Obviously offensive. I kind of like it though, because it means that we craft our own lane. We didn't fit quite neatly into the categories of other people, and as a hybrid people, that's that's not surprising. So it was originally some, uh, I think, a couple of Europeans who had pleased Emperor Theodros. He was never interested in accepting their religion, but he was interested in their stem. He was interested in their technological advances, and especially how those could relate to warfare and how those could be brought to the country. And so he had a couple that he was on very friendly terms with, and then he got some others who he didn't like, and so they got imprisoned. So then Henry Blank is sent to go save these second batch of people with another batch of Europeans. And by the way, different Europeans. He's British, but there are other all types of like Portuguese and other people in the country as well. Some who've been quite assimilated, and some not so much, like Henry Blank himself. And even there's a Mr. Rassam who wrote his own account, who's an Assyrian in Ethiopia, which I find fascinating as our Semitic cousin, our distant Semitic cousin. But Henry Blank is sent to kind of save these people who were made prisoners to Emperor Theodros, who has no idea about the international community or international norms or protecting diplomats or whatever. These people are really spies. So he had no care for that. He was the absolute monarch of Ethiopia, and he was going to do whatever he wanted in his territory. But he ended up not appreciating these other this latter batch of British who came to save the first batch, because some of them weren't following all of the proper etiquette that the Habesha knew of. And so it wasn't just out of ignorance, but it was out of kind of disrespect to the cultural norms of the kingdom. And so they end up getting captured too. They're in prison for something like 2 years. And eventually, Napier and Meriwether are sent on an expedition. By this point, the forces of Emperor Theodros had dwindled a lot. And when he had a few small forces, he kind of made a last stand at the Makdala fortress in Wadlo. And when that didn't go over so well, he was given an opportunity to release all of the Europeans, and then he would receive clemency if he, bowed down to the Queen of England. He wasn't about to do that, so he did end up killing himself. And a lot of people valorized this story ever since I was a young kid, and I never understood it. The idea of not surrendering, I understood, but I thought kind of, and maybe it was Tupac songs that I listened to growing up, but I thought a kind of guns blazing loss, the way Emperor Yohannes later did to the Mahdists in Egypt, or Sudan rather, would have been more appropriate as a kind of honorable way to go. But to each his own. And there were a lot of politics to how the British entered. I always wonder when I first heard this story, and then when I read the book in its entirety, why did the British then not take over all of Ethiopia? Some people say they were simply not interested. I think they must have had some sort of logistics, and the data analysts of the time tell them that it would have been too great a cost, because they got Kenya, they get Sudan, they get Egypt, they get some part of the Somalias. Why not take over Ethiopia, especially after an expedition, quote unquote, leads to the death of the emperor? Well, I think the reason is, number one, the way they kind of entered through Mitsawa and modern day Eritrea and through all of the territories to get to Teodros is because, and I picked some of this up from Bahuru Zode's great A Modern History of Ethiopia that I read many moons ago, about more than a decade ago now, is that there were all these kind of countervailing forces from that decentralized period that hadn't yet fully centralized, that wanted to take the King of Kings of Ethiopia title for itself. And so it's the backroom deals of the likes of like Emperor Yohannes and the intrigue of Wagshum Gobazi that kind of allow the British to come in so cleanly, get everything they got, and go. And I was thinking about this book again. I was going to review this a couple days ago, but then today I was seeing in the news people were sharing this article on Twitter. So I want to read it. It's very brief, from the BBC. Ethiopian Prince Alamayo's lock of hair returned after 140 years in the UK. and a very sad picture of my distant cousin through the mother, not through the father, of Prince Alamayo and Captain Charles Speedy, who accompanied him from Ethiopia or Abyssinia, becoming his guardian. Always very skeptical of me that they took the son of Emperor Theodros as opposed to leaving him with some distant family in Ethiopia. Um, this is by Hannah Tamwari. A lock of hair from a young Ethiopian prince who died over 140 years ago has been handed over in the UK to representatives from his home country. In 1868, British soldiers took Prince Alamayo away after invading the fortress of his father, Emperor Theodros II, who then killed himself. The crown prince died aged 18 in 1879 after an unhappy upbringing in Britain. He was buried, again, suspicious that he died at 18. He was buried at Windsor Castle near London, but recent requests to have his body returned have been turned down. One of the prince's relatives, Fasil Minas, expressed hope that the handing over of the prince's hair could pave the way for his body to go back to Ethiopia. Amen to that. At a ceremony in London on Thursday evening, Ethiopia's ambassador to the UK, Tafari Malesa, took possession of the lock of hair as well as a number of other artifacts that had been looted from Emperor Theodros' Maqdala fortress. He welcomed their return, saying that they will go back to their rightful place where they can continue to inspire and educate generations to come. He said that Ethiopia would continue to press the UK to return more items seized from the fortress. Amen again. The prince was taken to London aged just 7, where his status as an orphan elicited the sympathy of Queen Victoria BS. She agreed to support him financially and put him under the guardianship of Captain Tristram Charlie Sawyer Speedy, the man who had accompanied the prince from Ethiopia. The Scheherazade Foundation, which facilitated the return of the lock of hair, said it had originally been in the possession of Captain Speedy. Lenny Turner, a descendant of Speedy, who handed over the hair in London, told Canadian broadcaster CBC that she had discovered the artifact among her family heirlooms. I felt Prince Alamayo's hair was a long way from home. Yeah, no shit. Sherlock. She is quoted as saying, Alula Pankhurst, a member of Ethiopia's Heritage's Restitution National Committee and of the great Pankhurst family, who's written a lot about Ethiopia and done a lot for Ethiopia, told the BBC he welcomed the return of the hair, but said this should just be the start. The restitution of Ethiopian artifacts looted by the 1868 British expedition to Maqdala is important for restorative justice. And a linguistic note, they spell it Magdala here with a G and Maqdala up there, just interesting side linguistic note, and an excellent way to build better relations and collaborations between British and Ethiopian institutions, he said. There have long been calls for the return of the prince's body, with a fresh demand from his descendants in May, yes, but in a statement to the BBC, Buckingham Palace rejected the call, saying exhuming the prince's remains would disturb the remains of others buried in the catacombs of St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. I'm not an expert on graves, but there's got to be an intelligent way to do this in 2023. I remember, yeah, they had this article of rejecting the return of his body. This was back in May of this year. And then it was in 2019, I remember, through great ceremony. It was before the Civil War. So there was a much more media coverage of large public demonstrations, but they had a lock of Emperor Theodros's hair that came to Ethiopia, and there was a giant reception in Gondar. And everything I see from TikTok, Twitter, from Fano warriors back home taking titles lets me know that it's not just me in little old Southern California, but there are a lot of Ethiopians who would who, number one, very much value their absolute monarchic history, and number two, would appreciate some form of return, whether ceremonial or full blown, because there's a lot of value to it. I saw a lot of teary eyes, a lot of great songs, and everything. Abyssinian Malik. Bit of an off topic. Have you read any of Paul B. Hen's work? If so, what do you think of them? I haven't read any of Paul B. Hen's, so please do let me know what he's written about. Is he written about anything related to? I don't know how off topic this is, but anyway, getting back to a narrative of captivity in Abyssinia, he kind of Henry Blank begins with Missawa, which at this time was under Turkish rule, as it was under rule. You know, there were a couple coastal points along the Red Sea that were under um, the great Ottoman or Turkish Empire, and Missawa was one of them. And so the British had some sort of connections there through their dealings with the Turks. And who knows, maybe at this point, at some point, it kind of switches to British hands. And then eventually, it gets to Italian hands, which is how the Italian colonization of Eritrea happens, is entrance through the ports. And even the disadvantage to Ethiopia during World War II has partly to do with the control of these ports, which is why the ports are an evergreen issue for Ethiopia that hasn't been resolved for quite a while, even though historic possession of it has changed hands a lot of times to many different groups. And there are other ethnic groups than the dominant one of Ethiopia that had closer proximity to those ports. But anyway, ports have changed hands a lot of times. A lot of silly arguments there. But he talks about how he's in that area. He talks about the way of life there because they have contacts in Yemen. They go to like Aden and other cities of the port cities of Yemen as well. So he's going back and forth between Yemen and Miswa and modern day Eritrea and trying to figure out a way to get to Ethiopia. He tracks inland into Sudan. From Sudan, he goes down to the border city with Matamma, which is on the Ethiopian side. I forget the name of it's like Gallabit or something. I think it's called Gallabit is the town. It's interesting that there are a lot of the more, we could say, Afro-Asiatic type mixed Sudanese people in that general vicinity, but at that point, that town had been started by some Nilotes from the far west, from near the Darfur area. And he talks about their way of life, their way of doing things, gets to Matamma. From Matamma, he eventually meets with Emperor Theodros, spends a significant amount of time with him, bargaining. Eventually, they piss him off, although not him directly, but he's guilty by association. He is charged by trying to get rid of the British prisoners, meaning trying to free the British prisoners without getting them to meet Emperor Theodros. And it wasn't him directly, but it was one of his colleagues who thought that if they had met him face to face, he'd get angry. They often call him like fickle. They use words like despot to describe him, as opposed to the things that they've done all over the world. They talk about a lot of the gruesome things that he does. He burned a lot of people. He threw people off of precipices. He threw people off of mountains. But they do talk about how he kind of united Ethiopia and the kind of fear he inspired in other people and the extent to which, as I mentioned earlier, Ethiopia was not then just taken over by the British, but that it was a kind of quick operation where they got in with the help of locals, and then they got out with the help of locals, and then they never came back. They looted a lot of stuff. And as the BBC is reporting, some of that stuff, like locks of hair and treasures, crowns maybe, are being returned. But things like the tabots or the arks of the replicas of the Arks of the Covenant are still sitting in the British Museum very sacrilegiously. And there are many other items there, I'm sure, from other cultures that people would want to demand as well. Anyway, I think it's good to understand what your enemies say about you. And my grandpa emphasized in his preface that in reading Henry Blank's book, you can see the love of Ethiopia that Emperor Theodros had. You can see the necessity of his harshness, and you can see other good aspects of his character as ruler. I mean, my grandpa loved Emperor Theodros so much that even though Emperor Theodros imprisoned my grandfather's uncle, Dajazmach later Ras Wube, Haile Mariam, in golden chains, took his daughter and raped her into marriage, and that the child of that, the product of that later compulsory marriage, which you couldn't call rape, is Prince Alamayo. When she wanted to go be a nun, she was a very religious person. In the face of knowing all of that, my grandfather put all of Ethiopia above his own personal family and uncle, who was a warlord of Simeon, and from Simeon / Walqait, who ruled Tigray, like many of the people of our family have in the past. He put Theodros, who united all of Ethiopia above him so much that he named his first son, my mom's older brother, my uncle, Theodros or Teddy, after this great emperor. So he pointed me towards this figure. I want to point you to this figure as well. There are other accounts. I think there was a guy, Charles Stern, was like an Anglican preacher or something. He was some type of missionary. He wrote an account. Mr. Rassam is the Assyrian. He has an account of his own as well. I think he was one of the interpreters. And then you have here this medical doctor, and there are a lot of episodes both in Misuwa and Matamma. In addition to when they're near Lake Tana and the cities there. There's one city that he mentions near Tana. I'm forgetting the name of, but he calls it like the third biggest city in Ethiopia, and I had never heard of it. I'm wondering if it's an older version of what Bahar Dar is today. If somebody knows and has read the book or reads the book and finds out, please let me know so I can trace that. And there are just a bunch of insights to this so that, again, you can find it on aksum.gumroad.com. You could find the Amharic preface separately, as well as aksum.gumroad.com. But I think I'm going to retype it and send the chapters out in addition to my other writings on aksum.substack.com as well, correcting for, or not even correcting, but whatever, adjusting and editing for an American English audience. It's funny, there's like he spells the word jail, Gaol, and apparently that's an old English variant that's supposed to be pejorative. And just little things like that, which is nice if you have the original artifact, which I have up there too. But it's nice to see it re-edited for an American audience. I think someone may have done that as well. Otherwise, I can't explain why he's writing about miles a lot in the book, as opposed to what I would expect to be kilometers, unless there's something I don't know about 19th century Brits who used to use the miles measurement in their system. Abyssinia Malk says Emperor Theodros was so ahead of his time in terms of his vision for Ethiopia, leading by example. Yeah, I think so too. Like I said, I disagree with his Amwamwata or his way of dying. I wish he maybe went out guns blazing. But overall, it's good to read the works of your enemies. It's a good test of your own patience and your own ability to take in criticism, to be able to see through what the biases of your enemy is, and to see what truths they're able to reveal about you that you may have forgotten or you only know implicitly, and they're bringing it out explicitly so that you too can get better and better. And so I encourage everyone, whether you find it on Google Books or whether you find it elsewhere on DuckDuckGo, or whether you purchase it and support the program aksum.gumroad.com, to read a narrative of captivity. It's just an amazing scene. I have the pictures there, and you could see something like 7 or 8 European people in literal chains, like in literal captivity, like almost chattel slavery. I mean, they were taken care of as guests. They were given servants. I mean, they were allowed to use their own money to get servants. They had huts and guards. They had udge and tips and all sorts of other treats. I mean, it's never great to be even in house arrest, but it's just an interesting episode in both Ethiopian history and in British history. It raises some questions, like I said, that are unanswered, like why didn't they colonize us, or why didn't they try? And I have to think that itself is a sign of respect to Ethiopia, that there wasn't even an attempt at the time. There was an attempt by some, and some say this, when they helped out a bit in World War II, when we ousted Mussolini and his fascist Sarawit or army. But America did not allow that to happen, and Ethiopia did not allow that to happen at the time. So it's just something to consider, something to ponder, something to reflect on, is what was the role in Emperor Theodros after 70 years of extreme decentralization, you could say lawlessness, chaos, weakening of central power, and how did he set up later Wagshum Gobeze and then Emperor Johannes. Wagshum Gobeze became Emperor Tekla Georgis, and then Emperor Johannes, and then Emperor Menelik, and so on and so forth, to create a modern Ethiopia. And is there anything in 2023 that Ethiopians have to learn by reading this British account from 1868 about who, what, where, when, and why our emperor captured Europeans, some of whom gave him some technological advances, and some of whom were doing some spying and other subterfuge, and everything around that in terms of international relations, intrigue, and what happened in the aftermath. So, complicated figure, Emperor Theodros, by all accounts, harsh. But the question is, was it unnecessarily was he unnecessarily harsh, or was he necessarily harsh? I'll let you all decide. Raya Alamat A, I like this name. I ordered my copy leather bound from 8 Books. Nice. Keep it up, brother. I always dream about restored and glorious Ethiopia. Me too. And shout out to Raya, which is an Amhara land, and we'll keep saying that to people until they get it in their veins. There's a great TikToker, I'm forgetting her name now. It's like Senorita something, which cracks me up. But she's been saying a lot of Raya and in general Wallo Amhara history. And so we're finding revivals of this everywhere. You see Raya and Sakota celebrating Ashanda as well. So Ashanda is one of the cultural practices around the time of Filsat al-Mariam, or the translation or the ascension of Our Lady Mary in August. And we're seeing a lot of cultural revivals and restoration. We see the Fano approaching Addis Ababa. So we'll see what happens when the Fano make it to Addis Ababa. Of course, they're still fighting Gwajam and other places. I don't hear as much going on in Gondar near the Takaze, between the border of Gondar and Tigray. If anyone knows anything about that side of the conflict, I'd like to hear, because I heard a lot of bravado from TPLF, but I know they still haven't crossed the Takaze River. And I find that interesting, because they keep trying to claim those lands. Maybe they're waiting to see what happens when Fano is in Arat Kilo, or 4 kilometers. Belen Yamlak says Ashandi in Amhara region. Yeah, your family celebrates that? That's cool. My family never celebrated it, but I find that the cultural diversity in unexpected places, and obviously border regions share. Culture is not always one way. Sometimes it's more dominantly one way than another. But this is the big issue with some things that I've written on aksum.substack.com about the Oromo assimilation in Ethiopia, and the kind of conflict between the Oromo Prosperity Party right now and the Amhara Popular Front, is this question of, before TPLF, when the power was in the hands of the Solomonic dynasty, the Oromo made it to the top. I had Deacon Solomon Kibriye on my program twice, I think, and he's always a wealth of information. He shared recently a piece on King Mikael of Wallo, who was an Oromo, assimilated Oromo ruler, whose son Lijiyasu was regent, was basically emperor. Haile Selassie's family had Oromo in them too. Menelik's family had Southerners of unknown origin and there too. Like, there is an aspect of which bloodlines were important in Ethiopia, but it was never bloodlines alone, and everybody was still mixing. So everybody kind of brought their piece to the puzzle, and I don't know what to say to you. Like, Amharic did not become lingua franca of Ethiopia by accident, and even Emperor Johannes, the most famous, most valorous Tigrayan in history, chose to have Amharic as the language of the court. So I think a lot of these issues were resolved, but the Marxist-Leninist revolutions, first through class and analysis, and then through race analysis, destroyed our society from within. And we're still reeling and recovering for it, but we're not people who deal in decades. We're people who have long visions, like the Chinese and like the Russians, in terms of centuries. And so we will continue to make money moves over the centuries. We are patient that there will be a beautiful restoration. Belaine says her family did not celebrate it, even though she's Eritrean and Ethiopian. Abyssinian Melk, why do some doubt that Lijiyasu was emperor? Well, it's not so much doubt, but it's just like the regency thing. makes it not official. So you have like de jure and de facto, things on paper and things in fact. So he did kind of have a regency. And we don't really say as a Iyasu. We often call him Lij Iyasu, which is the title for people who are children or not of age to be properly emperor or king of kings of Ethiopia. So anyway, I recommend you go read Henry Blank's A Narrative Captivity of Abyssinia. You can find it online for free, or you can support me by going to aksum.gumroad.com. Check out the preface in Amharic only. It's scanned now. I should probably rewrite that to make it more beautiful, but it is very legible. And then you have the uploaded PDF in English of some manuscript of Henry Blank's that I might retype and edit in the American language for the good people at aksum.substack.com, and occasionally add my commentary. It was super quotable, and as I was reading it, I was sharing a lot on Twitter. So if you go through my Twitter feed or just type Henry Blank, and it's BLANC, not BLANK. If you type Henry Blank in Twitter's search bar and you follow me, you probably will find a bunch of quotes from the book. So even if you don't want to read the whole book, just read. I was posting a lot of quotes because I have the Twitter Blue that allows me the longer posts as well. Some are within normal limits, but some are within Twitter Blue limits. And it's just, there's just a lot to learn about the way that he looked at our society, the way that Emperor Theodros looked at our society, and the way that Emperor Theodros wanted to utilize the Europeans to make Ethiopia even greater than she was. And Ethiopia was great, and she will be great in the future. Thank you all for being here with me. Let's end the stream.